Um, more of the questions by na will be answered accordingly. Into no, Mr. Once we're done with the sickle cell educational, what's going to happen is that there'll still be time for Q&A session for Tap Send. Into no, Mr. This is a good time. We'll be a friend in you now. Then you also friend in you now. Be a friend of them for now. For the end, you'll be sure I'm saying the education. Edi am just so you PK for so, and I'm going to be your host for tonight. Ebi on me say in the say a program no backwards be sound usually no a time with Tap Send with our resource personnel first, then after that we do the Tap Send aspects no. But due to one or two dynamics, we have to just switch it up a little bit for A class to go ahead and start and just give us daily updates, and also the Q&A section as well. A classes they need daily updates up and a weekly update before we proceed.
But let's continue to pray for the best. And if any idea pop up, that's why the company will not hesitate to let our lovely and cherished customers know about it. And the company is also fighting hard to get more partners in Ghana. So at least when Osenusi can show, maybe we are go through smoothly. And so, these are the few updates that we got. And as I move on, also, we'll take it from there. So, thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, that's it. For the weekly update, before we proceed, the better say about about for the actually I say, especially one would say munam kwan so ekwa adwuma and I say bia munam kwan so erefie no regardless of baby alcohol bia no dey aseda kese e ma woni wobusuafo nyina enyo obia na benya adaje asai say bia oba dwumedie kese so na waba betie ne ekoso nti sa wotimi nya adaje na oba be me hunu say investment rather no won say wadaje ba wo invest in your time and it comes to your daily well-being as well as I said, you're coming together to network and see the best way we can educate ourselves and also give back to the community, as much as possible. So with that being said, you better na fedie. Ya call that aboafo amaso yasne ayedi djumede abramo ase. Teacher feel good services, adarema and edi djumede abramo. Osisa ope adwinipam adwuma pomudene anase bia adwunem dia na to say shomechra kwan e feel good services at gmail.com. Sa so biom na osisa wokọ Ghana na se ope baby ada anase bia opedan ato anase bia opedan po arrent a pe feel good homes and baby a ho badwudwo kama omo locations e wo Pokwase ana East Legon Hills say eye apartment na pesa woto an apartment na pesa rent na Airbnb na pesa ye and now so say ebia ope 3-4 bedroom homes anase bia asase crampo na to say omo na omo be di wanim ama bibia aye kama omo number na da fidie no so ye 513-372-5758 benim say number no fidie no so say 48 last two no be 58 and Ghana number no so +233 081-495-04 from eniomu ende nkita ho ebiom sa wo Ghana na sa ope bibi papa obetimi akwakoy your pedicure manicure and na sa facials aya look no further but Happy Glow GH. Happy Glow GH is a bra for your cosmetics, facials, eyebrow and eyelash threading, waxing, pedicure, manicure, acrylic nails and nail design. Omo located right opposite Veggies and Grill, 20 meters away from the community hospital. Now, omo number so and the defi so it's in case you would say ya mebo number now. +233 594 710 391. More Cincinnati, any its environs. May come catch them say clinic a beboa now feed the with me aya IV hydration or primary care and that's a weight management monitoring bia no and that's be restore the balance within Oswald Wellness Clinic SA Shomecha Kwan our number 513-268-2740. Nebium say wedding party adore and now say ebia any event be cause with the exception of divorce party. Mr. Blondes bespoke say bra no mo pam suit papa na emfata on nya kama ina anamafo aba no mo ye wedding na obema otimi ye wedding na afi de na yi obema timi ye wedding na afi de the bridal party and I say be the best man e yo oba o se oba de suit into the suit papa ebeko and I say be down ho ama bibia aye kaba pa dia na me kanfo Blondin bespoke amawo Mr. Form number na afi de frobo ne pam suit papa bi suit am she nyina oho na me enya fi enti se wo se ni yo se to bia wo ya manfo nti ase se enye atare na wo hye no kwa ne ka ho dipadua na hye atare ne soso ka ho but Blondin bespoke be ma atare na ama nipadua no akọ pepepe and if it's a parallel movement no to washada one washada kama neat pa and be bia so ye made in Ghana materials and so papa and what the bema enya nia obesi ewie na afede na etwetwe ahoma no and also besi ewie no na bia wo size 26 and after that 24 na ashrink no Blondin bespoke na afede and yomodi nkita omo number no option from director +233 555 927 378 and episode WhatsApp your ma +233 500 915 389. Opemu ni opemu na te se me kirawo se akuku da mo waso yasene a ye de edwumede ebra mo enadwumei nyina ahene mo hene anase bia ne wada from ama bibia e kama na enam ne so ama friend say kraman enya papa so egina ahoma na ye nyina fa so adua na ahoma na fa so ema ne ho soro no sa na me pa kire no na te se startup se na me ka forma na obusuafo nyina no se te se na earlier on A class kire startup se mu any one of the two ins and outs how to send money back home the fast the secure the reliable ebusani ba ko crash so eba be ma a good account of startup send any how abo on the busia nyina no startup send adore money dey browse fast secured reliable and very safe to send money back home. Rate this so there a dear cutine pa startup send and also a steady jumede nyabram sabe besa de munyina ase dem abunyina akwaba kese se batimi atena se na fide ba be di jumede kese ye be fa konye so na ye introduce ye special guest aye ni ba be di jumede and the next topic no ye edutwem was understanding sickle cell and its complication. Understanding sickle cell and its complication. To be treated the disease sickle cell and also all the ins and outs of sickle cell and complications are etimi esa so edeba. Enti Mr. Yaso na fe de yenti. Na answer the besha se nko nko frɛ ye nwa be ma ye offer ye ba ya danfo Dr. Steve Boatin na ye ma na kwaba be so. Dr. Boatin ye ma kwaba eba time with startup sensor.
I think say yeah you what I call you so and you bit me at sickle cell is one of those things that baby I free and who here pass you bit me at I see ye near whom send you one or more you need more you more sickle cell disease at Casano. The bet I said you won't go through and you may bit me up warm and it will be only sickle cell so no you know you bit me. You're finding resources a bit here and figure out how to know our genotype,
which is probably the most important thing. And then also talk about the entire your cassava sickle cell who na episode be a genotype. Into name the past and met me about 10 year. I mean, you introduce him and your friend Dr. Stephen Boating. If you come say but to Houston, Texas, and a lot of my research is really focused on sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait, and I also do some work in the oncology space. And to the person me say, I'll be sharing my screen. Now I'll walk you through just a few slides be able to me a good foundation about sickle cell. There was so TSU me walk in through me me be quite and not just say to me be say questions and mama me 1 minute but me share my screen now me
So Abra Dr. Boateng getting the screen ready now. I'll please urge and entreat each and everyone to please share this link. Whether be in the Zoom link, the Facebook link, or the YouTube link, so that we can always have a lot of people coming with a great input and also enjoyed this show together. Let's not be selfish. This is good information. Share with everybody so that we can all have a great input. It's better for them to come themselves and listen than you going back to talk to them about it because you might lose some information about it. So at this point, since Dr. Boyton is ready with the PowerPoint presentation, I'll let him take over and also dissect and bisect and roll us into the ins and outs of sickle cell and how best we can all be cautious of this disease.
Thank you. Thank
Oh,
you so
Dr.
much.
Boati, before you proceed, please write all your questions down because you guys gonna have ample time to ask all your questions. So write all your questions down. Those on Zoom, Facebook, you can go ahead and start putting your questions on Facebook, and I'm just gonna ask the questions as we proceed, or whenever Dr. Boati give us a little break for us to, ask some questions. So please write all your questions down, and we can ask those questions for you. This program is going to be both Chinglish, okay? It's going to be both Chi and English. So primarily, it's going to be English with Chi. I mean, it's going to be Chinglish. So I can't, promise or predict that it's going to be solely English. But please, your questions are very important. Your questions are the reasons why we're here tonight. Okay, it's not just because what Dr. Boati has to offer. Your questions is what's gonna make this show better. You guys know I'm for the viewers, and the resource persons are for the viewers too. So please make sure you get your questions ready, and at the right time, when we open the Q&A section, it will be a good time for everybody to mute and talk accordingly. Dr. Boati, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, more wanting to Mr. More bisa questions me fire away. And to send a message here, I'm just going in. First number me and some so be at say and ne jumedi the best start and it's a best start free sickle cell disease and cancer, right? So we're going to learn about what sickle cell disease is and to free from inheritance all the way to current treatments in terms of more sickle cell diseases here. In real benny what the mom cure one and I say complications ben no go to your best start here free honor. Near free honor my sickle cell trait, right? And I'll give a good foundation about what is the correlation between sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait. Then sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait, any similarities and difference. And then the here partner said, and then kind of make us say a lot about the and the bit me I sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait. Now you be a kind of questions, but Mr. More questions more man and the first number me starting and say, Mummy and quiet, right? And sending opinion for cano, a toda alpeso co anima, untumin quadus or which no see free which honum. In Tinomian creating yen senior, yara in him for your friend sickle cell disease, him funny free buy, right? And so thinking about sickle cell disease, it's a blood disorder, right? And Timeno, especially for my work in the sickle cell space, I think one of the biggest myths, about with sickle cell disease, when they say most of the time, especially in your culture now, binum when they say be a sickle cell no a witchcraft, and I say it'll be it's a curse. The first thing I want to establish here is that it's not true. Sickle cell no a blood disorder. Now, the entire business is spending time going through this. I think say it's important. It's a bit to me lays our foundation that as we keep educating each other, a bit to me I say I do yare win a blood disorder. Intino, the ambassador me chair say send me no send so my no papa conceive or hair color or skin color. All the things that make you send your old the same way no be so inherited sickle cell into typically mommy or papa right biological parents you inherited genes every each parent on right until you inherit the gene from your mother you inherit the gene from your father and so that gene and they beat me actually say now skin color better say now hair color better say now moja so be see at beat me a year into the first now see a TS and say usually before she be sickle cell can be so be a TS say typically right say nipa you or each parent man bano ade be a friend hemoglobin A Mr. Moon bear me with English no kakra right into just walk with me into typically so being sickle cell parents omo bano ba obia man ba kwade a friend hemoglobin A ba kofi mame na hemoglobin A ba kofi papa ne ho now can mean bu ma sa kra no AA I'm sure say AA yate ho asem bebre nti akra no ye won know A ya de chia ne say on inherit 1A ba kofi ne mame yo and inherit 1A ba kofi ne papa Omo AA no, which is typically most people no. The AC say AA no is the gene you've inherited, right? It's the end of it, send your moja be say juma. Now moja no. So everyone say be our famuja sisia no we prana famuja na. Now first amuja no. Now share ewo microscope asia brony cast a microscope asia the obehu ni say moja na these cells, right? To hear me screen so I want say first a second image na form one and the first one is circle no omo AA no sa no moja na tatia, right? It's just round shape that it to me go through or blood vessels echo baby echo ye juma so ye to be out to be say na moja kra den kra na so mfaso ni. I will say you figure out about be a circle, be so near circle. The entire moja who here red blood cells who here say carry oxygen and it's carry a lot of nutrients, right? And you know, especially with the oxygen focus, no, because I know you have sickle cell say. So be what a now in the red blood cells, they don't home screenings, you know. Red blood cells to meet oxygen in such a way so inhale the oxygen now, lungs, then they come out red blood cells, now or tissues or coma or lungs, any your brain, your heart, everywhere. And say when moja ne boa masa oxygen nutrient in alcohol. And just always that a na umuja na ewo is this red blood cells near sa circle and circle didn't see on here say it me movie it change shape. I'm going to give this analogy to say, you know, so Ghana was a ubiabe kaya unsi yusano in shuta sene sunsuno a pieba form. If you're just in a sunsuno sitiana, or to movie, uchan mokrano asa switches to me kobe before from. Sana typically moja to me. It me go through your blood vessels, no, a kobe be anti block be any honum, right? It's not blocked. A kobe be na mouth, nutrients, oxygen, no, I fine. Now, or more sickle cell, and then the challenge neighbor because omo the isi says how omo jano omo red blood cells no last about 20 to 30 days. It be on last about 10 days but na nipa bia no so only sickle cell and that's only sickle cell treater umoja last year about 120 days, right? In after 120 days umoja na adwuma na new one form it. More sickle cell disease be 10 to 20 days omo moja no a year juma be brain na obo se be omo bre almost how all these complications maybe can one but I want us to understand this will be a omo moja to say circle yeah we transport oxygen. Now so should be let's say be a parents no more dear friend sickle cell trait honey say or more A and or more S back, right? This is very typical. It be there's different variants, and no person will nerdy out that so be whom I'll give you the different other variants. But for generality's sake, you know, obi or sickle cell trait and I see any case attackers who are carrier, and as a sickle cell trait carrier or more A back S back. And you know, say nipa munu A S normal work rana parents no maybe a mommy no ma cranny A no papa na ma a cranny S sa crano AS or money from some year carriers no in then also will be at TS now for sa two parents now momo AS no maybe a parent ba kuma a cranny S now for frost ma cranny S a crano SS and no more sickle cell disease and it is a crano SS and again think about sickle cell a moja yari. It's a blood disorder. It's not a curse or anything. It's very, very common. Maybe a friend is very common because I'm going to tease you guys. I'm going to explain to you the entire before more. And globally, I think one thing he has also be at and say about 300 children are born annually with this disease. Seminole can say, see, pull the data away from global perspective. Every 2 minutes, be a cry, you walk or sickle cell disease. So it's a very big challenge and you probably bro and more sickle cell trait more carriers over 300 million people we are here or more sickle cell trait. And so that's the first thing I want all of us to understand. Again, this is just a hemoglobin and the word red blood cells name is just a change in the switch hemoglobin husa yare. And you know me twice on my comment next slide you'll be who say me kind earlier no sickle cell no the most common one your friend is sickle cell SS. Now your SC, your beta thalassemia, SAE, which me aqua do be brave, but the type common pa and the SS no. Now, one thing I will be at is sickle cell, obi orias be a bit me, irrespective of who race or ethnicity or baby or free or be a bit me. Nanso no, yeah, you free Africa region hon. we or be our ancestry from Africa, you're more likely to get it most common. And in the social more sickle cell disease now, Baby can one of way through. The thing is, sickle cell disease, it's all about blood, right? So mujane into me kobe bia or body mo body material screen is into me kobe bia and produce oxygen nutrients our way. You can only imagine into no more sickle cell, more complications were typically all around the body. That's why I always say some of the most resilient people obviously are more sickle cell disease because they go through a lot. It's a disease of the blood, and the blood cannot transport oxygen and nutrients to every part of the body. Into now all these complications. It's just good for Alicia, but as I said, say most of the time there's more pain. There's a lot of pain they deal with: infection, stroke, priapism. A lot of lung complications. So think about a disease that affect the blood, and the blood could be BI, and it can affect any part of your body. Again, to see if you hear more sickle cell and to be able to to more yari to them pioneer your mom. The first number your mom when it says to see and there's a lot of studies showing that crowd sickle cell the mom penicillin antibiotic. A more fighting infection, more sickle cell use low immune system. I know that they need to say, yeah, you need sickle cell, right? So they need this penicillin to fight infection. Plus, most of the time, more sickle cell, they tend to lose their spleen. Spleen, body with spleen. Spleen is also part of it. It helps the immune system. Into no more sickle cell because the spleen, it also helps filter a boa filter muja. But no more sickle cell because the spleen year juma it me and sometimes it go which me check your sickle cell image. Ebia or musa. Would you bear 4, 5, 6, 7? Obe check image no spleen be spleen that die will co baby. Into a spleen, again, not just the spleen, but their immune system, they tend to have a lot of complaints in that penicillin here. I think the second one year, you probably to that almost supposed to 10 here blood transfusion again, send them to because their blood have a short lifespan, right? It's only about 10, 20, maximum about 30 days compared to Kenya lasted 120 days. It's here blood transfusion here. It be on here oxygen, it be on here pain medicine to say opioids, NSAID, to say ibuprofen, Tylenol. Maybe on here pseudoephedrine. I know said and just common. So more experiencing priapism, pseudoephedrine, warm.
Doc,
me too on Kappa and to me.
Can you no okay no it wasn't a question. Can you just make it all English for me, please? Because the viewers would like for it to be yes, all English for especially for the educational part because we have someone say that they really want to hear this education, but they will need it to be mostly English. And again, like I said, I apologize to everybody. This show is predominantly English, but for the sake of those of you who cannot understand, because we understand that not everybody in Ghana speaks English, Chi. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Chi language, we will just switch it up to English only, and for the educational purpose. Then once we're done, we can just go back to the local side. All right, so don't just straight English. Thank you.
Awesome. You guys have been just saving me, so I'm going to just dive in. So the other part I want to talk about is looking at drugs that are currently approved for sickle cell, right? So they're all left on. That's what you see is the drugs that are typically used for maintenance therapy. On the left, there's a drug called hydroxyurea. It's a drug that has been approved since 1998, and they're bought with it produces hemoglobin F for a lot of people with sickle cell disease. So that's probably one of the most staple drugs. Here in the US, there's a drug called Endari. It got approved in 2017. The fact that I want to lay out for everybody to understand is that when you think about sickle cell was actually the first hemoglobin disorder discovered in modern medicine. It's no debate about it. It's the first ever discovered. Now, what if I told you that currently, and this is only US, there's only 4 approved drugs. And even the 4 approved drugs, the first one was approved in 1998, and it didn't take until 2017 until the second one got approved. And then the next 2 that you see here, Adagio and Oxbryta, they got approved at the end of 2019. So it speaks a lot to the disparity in terms of care that these individuals living with sickle cell have to face. And again, that's why we do a lot of education and advocating for more research people living with sickle cell, because they truly need these medications, right? There is a cure for sickle cell, but it is very complicated, very challenging The bone marrow transplant is typically the mainstay. In bone marrow transplant, the biggest challenge is that you need a matching donor. Right? I know people that have gone through bone marrow transplant and have been successful. I also know people that have gone through bone marrow transplant and unfortunately passed away. So it is a very challenging process to go through, especially if you don't live in very area, here in the US or in the UK, where you have a very high end medical facilities. That can be very challenging. So it's not a global cure. And I guess, like I said earlier, over 60% of people affected by sickle cell live in the African region, and this is not readily available to them. These drugs that I just told you have been approved. Neither Adagvio, Oxbrida, L-glutamine, most of these drugs are not available in the African country. So most people can, even they're lucky, they can get hydroxyurea, which can be very challenging. I share all of this to all of us to remember that there's therapies available. There's a lot of research being done, but we still have a long way to go because most of these people don't have medications and even cure approaches. There's some gene therapy also going on, which is something exciting for all of us to be aware too. So when I want to move on, let's see, the next thing I want to talk about is sickle cell trait, right? So we just got a foundation about sickle cell disease. Now I want to spend some time diving into sickle cell trait. Just like I said earlier, when someone has sickle cell trait, that is when they only have one copy of the sickle cell gene, right? So remember, just like you see on my screen here, people with sickle cell trait has one A and one S, right? And the key fact that I want everybody to remember, people like, so why is this talk even important? So if I don't have sickle cell disease, like I just explained to everybody that, hey, this is what people with sickle cell disease go through. Well, what if I have sickle cell trait? Why does that matter? The first thing that's important is that if you have sickle cell trait, you have a chance of passing that gene on to your children. So as you can see in this diagram here, when two parents have sickle cell trait, they have a 25% chance of having a child born with sickle cell disease, right? So two parents can give a child sickle cell disease just from the mere fact of them having sickle cell trait. They also have a 25% chance of having a child who has neither. The child is going to be AA and just going to be just fine. And they also have a 50% chance of having a child born with sickle cell trait just like themselves. Now, what I just shared here, that's with every single pregnancy. So every time two parents with sickle cell trait decide to have a child, these are what these numbers present. And again, the key fact is to remember that people with sickle cell trait, it's not sickle cell disease, right? Sickle cell disease, these people is a real disease that going through complications. People with sickle cell trait, it's not the same. Now, about 1 in 13 Black African Americans babies are born with sickle cell trait. Now, if I took this same number and extrapolate to our African continent, that number is even more higher, especially because of where this disease came from. So I think that is why it's important that we touch on sickle cell trait as well. So I'm going to give you a little bit more facts about sickle cell trait because I think it's important that we understand some of these things. So the question I get a lot, people say, why do we always think sickle cell, and most people think about being a Black disease, right? We hear that a lot. And I think that it's important that we try and debunk that myth. So the first thing I want to say is anybody, irrespective of race or ethnicity, like I said earlier, can have sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait. However, the truth and the known fact is that it does affect people higher if you're from parts of African region. And the reason why this is true is because, as you can see my image here, it impacts people who are from regions or parts of the world where malaria was and is common. So why is this? And what does malaria have to do with sickle cell? So let's give a quick foundational analysis to this, right? So if you're like me and you've ever been infected with malaria, the first thing I think we all agree is that those parasites, those mosquitoes, those plasmodium, they love blood, right? And like I said earlier, sickle cell in general, it's a blood disorder. So what's the correlation? So if you have to think about how sickle cell came about, it's actually one of the most fascinating things our bodies did, right? So ideally, everybody had the hemoglobin AA. Everybody had AA and was doing just fine. Now, what happened is that you have malaria infecting people. So now what happened is that our body said, hey, this malaria keeps infecting me. And when they come in, they target in blood. They want to suck out all the nutrients and oxygen and everything that I want. It makes me really sick. So the body said, I'm going to switch a gene. I'm going to switch one gene whereby when I'm walking about, I'm doing just fine. Whenever a malaria parasite infects me, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to give my body this superpower where my body can take that red blood cell that the malaria has infected and I'm going to sickle. So sickling is pretty much when a red blood cell, the round shape, pretty much extends and breaks apart, right? And loses everything it has. So our body was, again, think about the malaria correlation, was that our body said, hey, I'm going to switch this gene up whereby whenever I get infected with malaria, my body will have the capability, just like you see on the image on the right, right? It's going to have the capability to sickle. Now, when I sickle, that malaria that has infected me, it's going to be open up. It has nowhere else to go and it's going to die because it doesn't have the nutrients in the blood and everything like that, right? So by that one switch that happened because our body wanted to outsmart malaria, that is where sickle cell trait came from, right? So people with sickle cell trait, they have 1A, 1S. Again, that's the most common. It doesn't mean it's always the same. Most common. They have 1A, 1S. They typically do just fine. Do sickle cell trait, nothing is going on, doing just fine. And now what you see happen is that when they get infected with malaria, what you will see is their body, because it's going through that stressful environment, will have the capacity to sickle. When it sickles, that malaria tends to die and the body comes back to normal and just fine again. So what you will see is that most people that have sickle cell trait, they can still get infected with malaria, but the severity typically is not as high compared to, let's say, people that have AA or people that have SS. So this is really where sickle cell came from, right? And so if you think about a hypothesis, this malaria hypothesis, that is why most people with sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait tend to come from regions or parts of the world where malaria was common, which is typically the African region. So that is really where this evolutionary trend came from. One thing I like to say, I remember late 2019, I was out in Nigeria. Former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, has this big sickle cell foundation, and they had me at this conference speak. And I put this slide up, and all the researchers there were like, what do you mean by this? And I stand unapologetic to this. This is one thing I believe. I strongly believe that while we continue to advocate for research, funding, more therapies and cures for sickle cell disease, if we do not tackle the testing and educational gaps in sickle cell trait, it's always going to be like pouring water in a bucket that has holes in it. That's what I believe. We're always going to fall short unless we address sickle cell trait as well. So one of the biggest challenges that we tend to see with sickle cell is that most people with sickle cell trait, they don't even know they have sickle cell trait. So as I end my conversation today, I just want to share some key things for all of us to remember. Just like I shared earlier, sickle cell trait, it evolved to serve as a protective factor against malaria, right? So sickle cell disease, sickle cell trait, these are not curses or some witchcraft or anything. This is a blood disorder that evolved to protect us against malaria. So that's why when you have people with sickle cell trait, they tend to have less severe symptoms from malaria. Now, people with sickle cell disease, you're probably like, well, they shouldn't also be infected with malaria too. But keep in mind, when they have sickle cell disease, their immune system is not as strong too. So for them, unfortunately, malaria is actually one of the biggest infections that kills people with sickle cell disease on the African continent. I think what's very fascinating is that after even knowing what we know so far, most people with sickle cell trait, they don't even know they're carriers, right? And I think the biggest reason is if I take the US here alone, right? One study says that only 16% of Americans know their sickle cell trait status. And again, I'm going to give you US to give you context, right? If you think about the United States here alone, testing for babies to know their sickle cell genotype, it wasn't universal across all 50 states in the US until the early 2000s. So before the early 2000s, a lot of people were born, these hospitals were not mandated to test, and a lot of people were walking and they don't know their genotype. And I'm pretty sure all of us on this call know somebody who was born before the 2000s, including myself as well. So it's just fascinating to speak to, even when you think about here in the US, where we always talk about advanced medicine, a lot of people don't know their genotype. Now take this same data and think about the African region, the continent we're from. Newborn screenings are not something that is readily available. I think Ghana has done a pretty decent job with some of my colleagues there with helping improve newborns. But a lot of people walk around and they don't know their genotype. And I think that is probably one of our biggest challenges with sickle cell when we think about it. Most people don't know their genotype. And people say, so why is knowing my genotype even important, right? Before I even give and refresh our memory about the genotype, right? So we're now talking about sickle cell trait, and that's why I think it's important people know their genotype. First thing I want to lay out is that even if you're not African, I had a lot of people say, well, if this is only Black people, then we should just focus on getting Black people tested. I know white people who have sickle cell disease. It is very uncommon in those groups, but it does disproportionately affect people that look like me, that look like you on this call. So why is knowing your genotype important? Like I said earlier, if you carry the sickle cell trait, you have a 25% chance with every single pregnancy of having a child who's going to be born with sickle cell disease. And you have a 50% chance of having a child who's going to also be born with sickle cell trait, just like yourself. So that's probably one of the most important reasons why it is important for us to know our genotype. The other reason why it is important that we all should know our genotype is that there's a lot of research being done, and I'm doing a couple of research myself. I have a current study that I just ran a couple of weeks ago, and one of the most fascinating things that came out of my current research was that for people that had sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait, over 60% of them said that their parents had no idea they had sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease, right? And this is a very common theme, especially in our African communities, where the way most people find out they have sickle cell trait is after they have a child born with sickle cell disease. And I'll show you data to highlight that. So aside passing sickle cell on to your kids, which can increase their risk of having sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait, the other thing is that a lot of research is actually showing that people with sickle cell trait, under certain extreme conditions. Again, keep that in mind. This is very rare, but it does happen. If you're here in the US, you've probably seen a lot of news and things, especially around athletes, where some athletes that have sickle cell trait, they've experienced complicated. Those are very well documented. So for people with sickle cell trait, under certain extreme conditions like severe dehydration, overexertion, which is like over exercise when you're not properly prepped or didn't go through, let's say, proper warm-up activities, or low oxygen levels, or increased atmosphere, or high altitudes, people with sickle cell trait, they can sickle. So the same way I gave the analogy about malaria earlier, right? Like I said, under these extreme conditions, when malaria infects these people, the blood can sickle. A lot of this evolving research is showing that under these extreme conditions, people with sickle cell trait, they can sickle. Now, again, I'm going to keep highlighting these things are not common, but they do happen. Some of these complications can include blood in people's urine. Some of them can have eye complications. Some of them can have severe muscle breakdown. There's a rare kidney cancer called renal medullary carcinoma. Over 90% of people that have this kidney cancer are people that have sickle cell trait. Again, I'm not talking about disease anymore. We're talking about people with sickle cell trait, right? The carriers. There's a lot of evolving research showing this. And even under certain circumstances, because it's a blood disorder, and mostly when diabetes is being diagnosed, they use blood to determine it. Some people actually with sickle cell trait can get misdiagnosed to have diabetes or not have diabetes. So these are some of the current research that is showing that these potential complications can occur with sickle cell trait, and that is why it's important that people know their trait status. You probably have sickle cell trait. You're probably going to be just fine walking around, and nothing is going to happen most of the time. But these complications can happen, and then, like I say this all the time. I'm going to say it here. The reason why I think it's important everybody knows their genotype. I think it's like wearing a seatbelt when you drive your car, right? Most of the time, I'm sure all of us will agree, you probably never needed your seatbelt. You drive home, you go to work, you come back, you're just fine. But under that one chance, right? That one chance that, God forbid, unfortunately, you get in an accident, that seatbelt could be life-saving. To me, it's the same approach that I think about when we try to encourage people to know their genotype. Knowing your genotype, you're probably going to be just fine. All you need to know is just know if your partner has sickle cell trait, maybe you're well informed, you can make informed decisions about having children. These complications are very rare, but I'm pretty sure none of us want to be one of those rare conditions where, unfortunately, some people pass away from this kidney cancer. Some athletes have severe blood in the urine. I know athletes that have their spleens taken out because of sickle cell trait. So that's why I think it's important that everybody knows their genotype. So what can we do, right? So as I kind of wrap this up, I think the first thing is that let's just get back to newborn screening. My hope is that we can get to a point where in Ghana, newborn screenings are free and recommended for every child. So every parent, as soon as they have their children born, they can know their genotype. Now, a lot of us on this call probably never had access to newborn screening. So I encourage you, if you can, to just get tested and know your genotype, because I think it's important. The last thing that I want to highlight with the testing is that there are some people that got tested and the test wasn't an accurate test. So some people might walk around and they say, "Oh, I have AA," but the test that was used gave them false positive result. So I always say make sure the test that you use is an accurate, reliable test. And you can always reach out to us to clarify those to make sure that you know your genotype properly. I want to share this insight. Like I said earlier, this is a known fact. I remember on one of our platforms, one of the organizations I work for, is Sickle Cell 101. We asked this question: how or when did you find out you have sickle cell trait? The majority of these people said they found out they have sickle cell trait after they had a child born with sickle cell disease. I've worked in many hospitals where I can account so many situations where a mother and a father came in, they found a baby has sickle cell disease, and they start fighting because none of them, one is like, "Oh, I think that's not my kid then." Well, you must have been cheating. And ultimately what happens is that neither of them knew their sickle cell genotype. I always say I have no right to tell anybody whether to have a child or not. But I think what is important is that I think we owe it to everybody for them to know their genotype so they can make an informed decision and not get blindsided. So if two parents have sickle cell trait, they know that. If they decide to have a child, they're well prepared. They understand what this disease comes with, and they can stay informed whether to have a child or not have a child. This happens a lot. And that's why it's important that we know our genotype. As I end my conversation, I also want to encourage everybody on this call, if you're in the healthcare system, is that just reinforce when you educate. A lot of healthcare providers still are the biggest problem with sickle cell. They perpetuate the narrative that sickle cell disease occurs. So we need to keep educating even our healthcare system, healthcare providers. I always say we health providers, we don't know it all. We have to keep educating ourselves to remember that it's not a disease. And for people, it's not a curse. And people that have sickle cell disease, there's a lot that needs to be done for these people. I know we utilize a lot of religious and governmental organizations, and I think these groups, we need to keep encouraging these groups to have these types of talks, bring experts like myself in, educate your public, especially in the youth, right? Kids that are in the university, high school, or trying to think about marriage and having kids. It's important that they stay educated about this topic as well. And then just keep staying informed about the evolving research around sickle cell trait. Like I said, we're doing a ton of research. I think we all agree with us in the Black community. Most of the time, unfortunately, our healthcare system doesn't prioritize our needs, and we end up playing catch up. That's what usually happens. And so our job and our goal is that making sure that while we keep studying and learning about sickle cell disease, we don't want to end up playing catch up if these complications are more common than we think. So please stay informed and then just understand and just know your genotype just to be on the safer side. And then, like I said, those medical complications I said about sickle cell trait, they're rare, but they do happen. And they happen under dehydration, those low atmosphere and high altitudes. And I think it's important. This I pulled from medical literature. A lot of people are like, do you really think these sickle cell trait complications are real? They are real. They are being published. A lot of people just don't read about it. And these are some of those complications that have happened in some people that have sickle cell trait. I think the one most well documented, especially here in the US, is athletes, especially football players, that unfortunately some of them die in the summer months where due to overexertion. And then some will end up, anybody that does, you can look up the story of Ryan Clark. It's a very well documented one. Football player, Super Bowl champion, playing football high altitude in Denver. Didn't realize that, and he had to have his spleen taken out. Now, if you have sickle cell trait, you can be just fine in those areas. You just have to be informed and prepared about those complications. So as I end my conversation again, I just want to encourage everybody on this call to just know that people with sickle cell disease, they go through a lot. It's a disease that affects every part of your body. Just be kind to these people, and let's keep advocating for more improved research, funding, and hopefully getting them more access to medications. For my foundation called No One Behind Foundation, what we try to do in Ghana and Nigeria is giving families that have kids or adults living with sickle cell that are struggling. We focus on people in very remote areas, get them free access to their medicine. These people have to take medicines every single day. Most of them have to take folic acid because it's needed for them to make new red blood cells. So we try to give these people medicine for free. It doesn't have to be my foundation. If you know anybody supporting sickle cell, if you're back home, anybody back home, just help these people whenever you can, just so they can keep managing that disease. Because a lot of the treatments that we have here in the US, they're not there yet. Most of these people is folic acid, vitamin B, sometimes some blood supplements that can really help them. And I think your help can go a long way. The second thing is just get tested and know your genotype if you don't. share this information with other people, encourage other people to get tested and know their genotype. Knowing you have sickle cell trait, it's not a bad thing. It's just you staying informed about passing the trait on to your kid or having a child with sickle cell disease, or even learn about these potential complications. And the last thing I always want to say is that sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease are not mutually exclusive. We cannot tackle one without the other. So as we keep talking about sickle cell disease, just know your genotype, and also understand that these potential complications I talked about, they're very, very rare, but they can happen. Just like I shared earlier, it's like wearing a seatbelt for your car. You probably 99% of the time you don't need your seatbelt. But in that one case that, God forbid, someone slams into your car or something happens, that seatbelt can be life-saving. Same way it's important to know your genotype. You don't want to be those one rare cases where you have renal medullary carcinoma, or you have hematuria, or blood in your urine, or those eye complications. And ask your healthcare providers whenever you have to have surgery, if you have sickle cell trait. Sometimes some of these people might need additional blood. Educate your healthcare providers too and help them stay informed. And with that being said, I want to say thank you, everybody, for listening to this conversation. There's a lot that we don't know about sickle cell disease, but what we do know is that it affects people that look like me and you. And it's important that we take charge of our health and educate ourselves about it. So I'll stop talking and see what questions we have in the chat today.
Very much for such a beautiful presentation and how well you dove into it, and also dissected everything that we need to know for now. Before I proceed into the question part of it, I want to make a quick announcement, okay? So, whilst I'm making this announcement, this is how everything's going to flow. I have a message over here that I'm going to read, and also it's a question. Then we're going to flow into the Zoom questions. Then, right after the Zoom questions, we're going to look for Facebook and YouTube questions. And after that, I'm going to give chances to those on Zoom to actually unmute themselves and ask those vocal questions. So please, this is a good time for you to put your reaction button, raise your hand on Zoom. I don't mean by putting your hands up, but hit the reaction button, and also look for raise hand on the reaction button and just hit it. And I will call you guys in that order. But before we go there, let me go ahead and make this quick announcement. So if you see me to this hat, right, it says Margaret Herb Foundation. Okay, so what Margaret Foundation is about is every year there is a program for those in the diaspora that goes back to Ghana, and it's more like networking and also education, have a good time, and meeting new friends and stuff like that. So I want to give you guys this opportunity to actually let you guys understand. If you look in the Zoom chat right now, okay, there is a YouTube link over there. Please click on that YouTube link after this show. Go watch it. And also there's a way to be a part of this program from 28th to 31st of December. And this is happening at Malin Beach Resort. Okay, it's going to be a great time. We're going to have, people in the likes of, Dr. Boatens and those that have foundations and stuff like that to come out there and talk to us. And also we're going to have some celebrities just come around and just give us a good insight about life. So it's not just of education, it's entertainment, education, and also having some exercise going on. So the 3 E's that you can think of. So it's Margaret Foundation, and is the title of the program is Margaret Experience. So this is our 4th edition that we have going on. So please, if you want to be a part of this fun filled event, please make sure that you go out there, register, sign up for your room, because the rooms are really selling out quick. So please do that. Once you sign up, you will be added to a chat room, and that chat room have everybody that are going on it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is HRTV has a chat room that we all meet and talk about the next topic that we want to discuss, or future topics that we want to talk about. So if you want to be a part of, I urge everybody to be a part of this chat room family. Okay, it's called His Royal Empire chat room. So once you click on, and again, that chat room is also on the Zoom link as well, and I'm gonna copy that and put it on all our social media handles again, as we do every week. Please click on it. Automatically it adds you to the chat room, and that is where we do all the future discussions and topics. So when it comes to all the legal topics that we talk about, all the medical stuff that we talk about, the mental health part of discussions that we have, everything is just being summarized over there. And so please I would say take opportunity of this and let us know. And in the future, if there's something that you guys want us to do all English, we will start, participating with that. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions. So this I'm gonna read anonymously, okay? I'm not gonna put no names. I am a sickle cell person. What is your take on iron pills and folic acids daily? I have taken it for 70 years out of my 74 years lifespan, and by God's grace, I have survived. Praise the Lord. So that is a message that came to me on my personal chat whilst you were talking about it. So before we proceed to the next questions on Zoom, I know you did talk about folic acid being one of the good things to do. So what is your take on the iron pills?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't know is why iron is important. So iron is one of those things that our blood actually needs so it can hold that oxygen very close. So it's important that people take iron if they have to. Now, keep in mind the reason why folic acid is very staple in our community for people to take it is because a lot of our food is not fortified, right? So a lot of the food that we have back home is not fortified. I will tell you, if people are eating more legumes and a lot of the other things that we think we should be eating, those things typically have that. But other foods are not fortified like here. That's why folic acid is important. Some people, just like this person said, by just them taking folic acid and vitamin B12 alone and staying healthy and hydrated, they do just fine. But it doesn't happen for everybody. Iron. It is great that people take it, but it's important that people also know there are certain cases where you can get iron overload. Now, if you're taking it as a pill, there's different forms of iron that you take as a pill. Most of the time, the one you take as a pill, your body can actually help excrete the ones that you don't need. So one thing I encourage people that have sickle cell diseases, especially if they have to get chronic transfusion. If you get chronic transfusions, you get something called iron overload. So you have to let your doctors know, and they can give you medicine. There's actually medicines that can help take iron out of your blood system, like XJ. So I am so glad and happy that I heard this story that this person is doing awesome with folic acid and iron, but hopefully they also have to stay informed and hopefully, sometimes just do a checkup to go see how high or how low your iron levels are. And sometimes you might have to get those irons reduced. But mostly if you're taking it as a pill, you do just fine. And like I said, this just reinforces what I said. These people have to take these medicines every single day. Some of them cannot afford it. And that's why it's important we keep doing this work. So thank you for sharing that. That's a good one.
All right, thanks, Doc. So now let's go to the Zoom questions. So producer is going to highlight the questions, and I'm going to read them out. What questions we have? So the first is, so Dr. Boateng, if you are born AA, can you transition to AS as you grow older?
It will never happen.
Okay.
Ever. It's never happened. It's a big myth, but it will never happen.
Okay, so Rafia said, I was told my baby had sickle cell trait, so I need to know about it. My husband and I didn't know we had anything, so how did she get it? Does it mean one of us has the trait as well? Can adults test for it?
Yes, 100%. So, Rafia, if your baby has the trait, one of you passed it on. It's 100%, right? If both of you haven't got tested, I think you should get tested. Now, I've seen stories where the parents were told your kid has sickle cell trait, and both parents went to get tested with the correct testing, and they didn't have the trait. What that means is that the test that was used for your baby was inaccurate. So there's two things here, right? You have to double check, make sure the most accurate test, I should point out, the most accurate test for sickle cell is called electrophoresis. It can be a little bit expensive, but that one will tell you exactly all the different levels of A and S. It's the most accurate. There's some point of care testing. But Raphael, to answer your question, if your baby's test was the most accurate test and that baby has sickle cell trait, one of you for sure had the trait. And you have to find the most accurate test and figure out which of you had the trait. And that's okay too if you find out.
Okay. So, and she continued to say, what can I do to keep my baby healthy if she has sickle cell trait? Is there some traditional medicine that will help? Is it related to chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that we're studying with sickle cell trait is I'll tell it's not very common, but some people with sickle cell trait will say they get fatigued very often. First thing I always say is that everything that you typically do for yourself, pretend you didn't have sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait, that energizes you, right? It's proper sleep, proper hydration, making sure we eat a well-balanced diet that everybody talks about. Do those same things. Now, if your baby has sickle cell trait and you're feeling like you're getting more fatigue, one thing that I encourage people to do is do quarterly checkups for the kid. See where their hemoglobin numbers are. If that hemoglobin is low, it might be anemic. They might need to take some food to supplement that. And then there's also actually a natural foods. When I was a kid, my mom, and I know a lot of us probably, our parents would give us liver, right? Liver of different animals, because those are very rich in iron, and the iron can help with the anemia too. So there's different types of food that you can eat that can help with anemia. A lot of grains can help with it. But I would say just make sure you're following up with doctors with that kid. I know it can be expensive, but the typical things that you would do for yourself that gives you energy, do the same thing for the kid, and focus more on the healthy food.
All right, and let's proceed to say thank you, Dr. Boatin. Very informative. The next one says, Doctor, please, how can we contact you? So, can Dr. Eben put in your contact information, and also if there is any link to your foundation so that people can actually, go ahead and just contact you on it as well. Okay, there you go, bro.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
There you go. So anything you need. So the first thing I say, like I said, I with an organization called Sickle Cell 101, we are the largest global nonprofit focuses on sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait, mainly on social media, big presence with 50,000 combined following. Please follow Sickle Cell 101. We do a lot of things. And I forgot to tell you guys, or the reason why we're doing this is also September is Sickle Cell Awareness Month. So there's a lot of things going on right now that you can learn more from our Sickle Cell 101 page. On the other side is my foundation, NOB_foundation on Instagram, or you can type the whole name on Facebook and Twitter. You can find us. And if you want to reach out to me on Instagram, it's dr__Boateng. You can find me there. And then the website that I have is www.sc101.org for Sickle Cell 101, where I lead research and partnerships. My foundation is www.nobfoundation.org. You can find us on all platforms. And if you're not tired of listening to me, if you go on Apple or wherever you get your podcast, you can find the Sickle Cell podcast, which I help co-host that as well.
Beautiful. All right, next question from Comfort. Comfort said, why do leg ulcers on sickle cell patients take a long time to heal? Any best way to make it heal faster?
You see me smiling here. I love this question. It is true, right? So I like to talk about the historical context. When you think about ulcer, or think about even a cut on a person with sickle cell body. Usually, as we all know, like let's say if I get cut with something, it's my red blood cells and platelets, right? The things that are in my blood, those are the things that come in and help stop that bleeding, right? That's a known fact. Now you think about people with sickle cell, like I said earlier, these people's red blood cells, they're working extremely hard. So those red blood cells, to summarize, they're trying to make a decision. Should I spend my energy to get you oxygen and nutrients to your brain, to your heart, to your lungs, or should I come to the leg ulcer? Right. And so if you think about all of those phenomenon, that really decreases how fast those leg ulcers heal. What I try to tell people is that make sure that leg ulcer is being cleaned up properly. A lot of the time people will just band-aid it and the band-aid is still dirty. And the leg, of course, we're usually walking with our legs. So make sure it is being cleaned up very properly. Antiseptics are very big deals. If you have a kid who has chronic ulcers, you might have to get them on antibiotics too. In some rare situations, this is a very expensive approach. When I used to work at St. Jude, what we do is something called bariatric oxygen. You stick their legs in high level oxygen saturated environment to really help healing too. So as far as our environment, if you have a kid that's struggling with that, just make sure you're cleaning that very properly. Of course, keep feeding them with the healthy foods that can help with healing. And if it's not better, you might have to put them on antibiotics to help with that.
All right. So that is basically the last one for that. So we're about to open up Zoom for people to talk and ask their questions verbally. But before we proceed, can the sickle cell itself, the cell that has been sickled, can it turn cancerous?
No, it would not. I got to give you a fun fact. So
Okay.
the drug that I told you about that's currently it was 1998, right? That was approved called hydroxyurea that is being given for sickle cell. It was actually a cancer drug. So a lot of the time you hear sickle cell and it might come up. So I want to give everybody a foundation understanding. That drug called hydroxyurea, it's a cancer drug that they figured out there was a child who had sickle cell and also had cancer. And when they took that drug, their levels of something called hemoglobin F went up, which is a good thing. So all of us on this call, it doesn't matter if you have sickle cell trait, or AA, all of us, when we're in our mother's womb, right? Our parents have already told us what genes we're going to make when we grow up. When you're in your mother's womb, you don't need any of those genes. So all of us, we have something called hemoglobin F. Now, after you're born, about 3 to 4 months, that hemoglobin F is going to switch to, say, hemoglobin A if you got AA from your parents, or it's going to switch to S if you had sickle cell from your parents. You're like, why is he even telling me about all of this thing? It is important because that hemoglobin F is a very, very strong hemoglobin that can transport oxygen. So when you're in your mother's womb, you're doing that just fine. So especially in our culture where testing is universal, the way a lot of people will find out their children have sickle cell disease is about 3 to 4 months after the child is born, that child starts to have complications. Because when the child is born, they're doing just fine. Their hemoglobin F is going to switch to their sickle cell hemoglobin. And that's when those kids will have swelled arms and a lot of pain and like, what's going on? And then they'll go find out that kid has sickle cell disease. I share all of this to say that that cancer drug, that's now hydroxyurea, it works amazing because it increases hemoglobin F, which can help people with sickle cell disease keep making hemoglobin F and transport oxygen to their tissues. But when that sickle cell dies, all what happens is that your liver and all excretory parts of your body are going to take those and flush them out. What happens, I think we all know, is most people with sickle cell, we tend to see them have jaundice, right? Or their eyes turn yellow. That happens because when their red blood cells break down, there's something called bilirubin. That's what causes the yellowing of the eye. So when you take those cells that you just described, those cells just get excreted and gets out of the body. And if you have excess bilirubin, it just kind of will show on their eye as being yellow, but it will never be cancerous.
Okay. Thank you very much. So at this point, you can unmute yourself and ask your question if you're on Zoom, and you have some questions to just verbally ask. Please unmute yourself. But once we have everybody going, I'm gonna need everybody to put their reaction button on. In case you don't know how to do that, just look on the bottom of your Zoom screen and hit more if yours is hidden. Go to reactions, okay? And when you go to reactions, you will see raise hand, you see thumbs up, you see the clap, you see the joy, open mouth, heart, and just click on raise hand, just like I just did. And you will see that my hand is raised. But I don't have any question because he has answered all the questions. So if you're ready to speak, go ahead and mute yourself. Whilst we waiting on people to mute themselves and talk, we have 5 minutes for to do this before we roll over into the Q&A section for Tot Upset itself. So Rafael comes back to ask, can you spell out the accurate sickle cell trait test name? Sorry for all the questions. No, those questions are valid. Don't be sorry about it.
I just put it in the chat.
You just put in the chat, so even better. So producer is gonna project what you put in the chat just for those on Facebook and YouTube, so that they can also see that as well. So hemoglobin, electrophoresis, phoresis is the most
Yep.
accurate form of testing. Let me say that again. Electrophoresis. Did I say that
There
right?
you go.
I
You
can
nailed it.
I cannot be in the in the medical field at all. I'm okay where I'm at.
What I'll do is I'll also put the links to my foundation and Sickle Cell 101 for anybody too that wants to learn about a lot of these things we're talking about.
Right. Okay, so Doc, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to bring you back more. Look, since September is a sickle cell month, and I know next month is breast cancer month. So what we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
do is this month we're gonna be dealing with you a lot. It's gonna be between you and the legal, practitioner. So we're gonna be dealing with you a lot, and please bear with us and put it on your calendar so that we can deal in another aspect of sickle cell as well. So today's the 4th. Next week we have a legal talk, and I'm gonna give the topic out soon. On the 18th, we'll try to see if we can get you back on the 18th, if that's okay, so that we can deal with another aspect of sickle cell, and dive a little bit deeper from different perspectives and see how best we can also capture those who have different questions and concerns as well. So please mark your calendar for us with a humble plea, if you may accept, and just come back and just talk to us about it. But other than that, I'm pretty sure that everything looks great. Everything was awesome. and it was very, very informative and educative. And I'm glad that the viewers are very pleased with your presentation. Thank you for honoring our invitation. It was a short notice, but you did pull through and also show up and show out. And thanks so much for raising the banner of black professionals and black medical practitioners at the good space. Those in the nursing, pharmacy, and also medicine as well. You guys are doing an awesome job, and please keep putting us on the map and showing us the great things that we all can achieve and do. And by doing so, you're actually giving back to the society as your way of corporate social responsibility and throwing your quota around so that people can actually, embrace themselves and make the world a better place for us all. So thank you very much for coming to show you your final words before I go ahead and let Director A Class, sign you out.
No, I think the only thing I would say is thank you all for having me. I never say no to talking about any healthcare related things. I think for me, I just want all of us to know that let's just embrace sickle cell as part of our history, and just be kind to anybody that has sickle cell disease, especially where we're from in Ghana. We have a long way to go with sickle cell. But if you didn't learn anything at all today, I just want to please encourage you, just know your genotype, because that can really impact the children that you choose to have, or even some of these potential complications. So thank you, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you guys again.
All right. So before you leave, somebody just asked me if he saw me laughing. It's like, what part of Kumasi? He said he's from Kumasi. What part of Kumasi is from him? What high school did he go to in Ghana?
Ooh, so I was born in Atonsu, Kumasi. I
Okay.
went to the best high school in Ghana. I went to Pokuai.
Oh my goodness, another warrior.
That's I
I
went
will
to the
let
best school in Ghana.
Dr. Sami Boate is watching right now, and I did let him know because he's also not worrying. Okateche boys are worrying so much. Anyways, I'll let the Prempeh boys know that you were in the building. I know that's
Take
your
care
best
of you,
rivalry.
man. All right, thank
All right,
you.
Dr. Class. Anything else you have to say when it comes to signing out?
Uh, Before that, I think Francis' hand is up. If it might
Oh,
be a request to meet him.
Francis, go ahead and speak. Unmute and speak, Francis.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Boateng. Um, my spleen is cut off. It's shrink off when I was young. I have sickle cell disease, so it shrink off. But my question is, does it affect every other organ? Does it mean that along the line, parts of other sensitive organs will also shut down? Because as of now, I'll be 46 next week, somewhere next week.
Yeah.
It's to shut down.
That's a great question, friends. Thank you for sharing that. So here's what I can tell you. The reason why the spleen is the first one that had to go, pretty for lack of a better term, is because, like I said earlier, literally your spleen is what helps filters all red blood cells. So you have a lot of sickled cells going through the spleen, and the spleen gets tired of doing that. What I can share confidently with you is that you have other immune system supporters that can still help clean your red blood cells. So when you think about your heart, and all other tissues in your body, they're generally going to be fine. But the reality is that a lot of your other organs too, they can be impacted by sickle cell. So that's why I always encourage people with sickle cell, do your chronic screenings where they can get your echograms done or your lab works done. It's going to impact other organs, but the way that it impacted your spleen, it's not going to be the same because your spleen literally was just responsible for a job that was too hard for it to do. Overall, you'll be just fine, but just make sure you're checking your labs, making sure all your organs are good, especially your heart. Echoes is one I always encourage, but sometimes before you find out about things that are happening outside of your body about sickle cell, it's usually too late because it started inside. So check your lab, check your heart, and hopefully that should be good. But thank you for sharing that story, that's Francis.
All right. I guess this is where we draw the curtains on with Dr. Stephen Boateng. Thank you so much for coming on board, and also thank you so much for talking to us. Next week's topic is going to be on acquisition of properties with lawyer Nana Bonsu. Acquisition of properties. So that will be our next week topic that we'll be treating here on Time with Tatop Sen, right here on HRE TV. So please make sure you let your family and friends back home know, and as well you yourself and your friends and family who are in the diaspora, because a lot of people go back home to do, set up businesses and also acquire some properties, and they don't go to the right way and end up having issues with that. So next week we will be dealing with acquisition of properties with lawyer Nana Bonsu Trade. Then the week after that, we'll be back again with Dr. Stephen Boateng. At this point, I would hand over to A class for us to go into the Q&A session with Tatop said. But those watching us on Facebook, HRE TV, Facebook, Tatop Sen Ghana, and also YouTube, HRE TV, this is where we draw the curtains on the live session. And I urge everybody to come on the Zoom side so that we can all talk and find better ways to, better serve you as Tatop Sen community. Thank you guys very much for watching and also giving us your audience.